I think it's possible to be a pastor and an activist, perhaps in the tradition of a Martin Luther King Jr. and still be an evangelical. I don't think Dr. King held evangelical convictions, and I don't think many pastors or activists could carry his books today. And yet, I think what King does teach us is that the gospel, if we believe it, really does have to make contact with real life. And if it's making contact with real life, then it must be speaking into areas of grit and grime, of brokenness, of injustice, of trouble in the world. And if the pastor is to teach his people to obey all the things that the Lord has commanded, to declare the whole counsel of God, then in some sense, at least in the sense of being the main disciple maker in the church, he's going to have to equip his people to be activists. And that means he's going to have to know something about what it is to be an activist. And if we include 1 Peter 5 and other places where the pastor is called to set the believers an example, so now he's teaching not just in his words, but by his manner of life, well, then that too requires him on some level, air quotes, to be an activist. I don't think he needs to leave the pulpit. I mean, eventually Dr. King would have to give up a regular pastorate in order to give his attention more fully to the work of the civil rights movement. I don't think a pastor needs to take that demotion. Most pastors don't. But he does need to be a living witness in his community and in his church, and does need to, as a Christian, most fundamentally, and as a Christian who's to be an example to others as a pastor, I think he does need to care about the world and people in the world and the brokenness of the world. And he does need to want to see God's grace address those things. That's the best kind of activism there is. And there's no inconsistency with believing that the Bible is God's inspired word, that it reveals to us God's character, and it shows us God's redemption through his son, crucified, buried, and resurrected, and it holds out the promise of a new heavens and a new earth, a new cosmos accomplished by Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And it speaks to us of a day where brokenness is broken and is no more, where all is mended and made new. That is not inconsistent with all the ethics of that kingdom, which require us to love the broken and to love our enemies, which require us to stand against everything that revolts against righteousness, which requires us to defend the cause of the widow and the orphan. That's true religion. And if we as evangelicals aren't given the true religion, then we're not really evangelicals. And so we want to be people who, in the best sense of the word, in the best sense, live out the truths of the scripture as fully as possible. And that includes, I think, bearing witness to the culture about what's good and right, what the good life entails. And if we call that activism, I think that's a fine title. And so there's no contradiction in my mind between being an evangelical who prizes the gospel and an evangelical who walks it out in the culture. If anything, I'm afraid we have too few examples of that.